Well, good evening, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? My name is Beth Hendricks. I'm the Executive Director of the League of Women Voters of Colorado, and I welcome you to the first session of our Spring Activist Training Series. The League of Women Voters is an organization born of activism. Our founders were some of the very suffragists who fought for and won the right to vote for American citizen women. It was a victory, but an incomplete one, because many women born and living in the United States were not considered citizens in 1920, including women of Indigenous and Asian descent. While Black and Latina women were officially considered citizens and therefore eligible to vote, they faced continual barriers to voting, from poll taxes to lynchings. And now, 106 years later, there's a bill before Congress that would make it more difficult for many millions of women to vote, about 70 million women, ironically called the SAVE Act. So thank you for being here tonight and caring about our democracy enough to want to act. Tonight, you'll learn about Colorado's legislative process and how to make your voice heard at the state capitol. Andrea Wilkins, LWVCO's legislative liaison, will walk us schoolhouse rock style, not really, through the ways a bill becomes a law and how you can add your influence. Session 2 on March 18th will be about activism safety and knowing your rights as a protester. That's ahead of the No Kings rally on the 28th. On April 1st, we'll discuss activism beyond the march, other peaceful ways to resist when there isn't a march. Session 4 will be about reaching marginalized voters. We'll hear from our partners at Mi Familia Vota and Colorado Criminal Justice Reform Coalition, who will discuss these key voting populations and how they still face barriers to the ballot. Session 5 on April 29th will be about holding local government accountable through league programs Observer Corps and Eyewitness. Session 6 will be about deep canvassing and the power of deep, meaningful human conversation to de-escalate, connect, and promote a healthy American democracy. And the final session, session 7 on May 20th, we'll come back to the state and talk about Colorado's budget process, because there's not much point in talking about bills if we can't talk about the budget. So thank you again for being here. And I'm pleased to introduce my colleague, Andrea Wilkins.
Thank you, Beth. I'm pleased to be here with you all tonight and really appreciate you taking time out of the evening to dedicate to this activity and, just your overall engagement. It's just so important at any phase, in our country, but I think a lot of people are feeling the need for action right now. So we're really glad to see you here tonight. I am going to share my screen. So give me just one second and hopefully I will get the setting right. Okay, what I'm hoping is that you all can see the slides without the preview and the notes. Is it coming through clearly for you?
Yes.
Thank you. I'm using two screens and sometimes I am not the best at getting it to display correctly, but I want you to be able to see what I want you to see. So as Beth mentioned, we're going to talk tonight about the legislative process in Colorado and We wanted to go into this not assuming any knowledge. We wanted to provide an opportunity to talk about this in a really foundational way so everyone can come into the conversation on the same page and comfortable kind of building on your knowledge. So, what we talk about tonight very well could be in parts a review for some of you. I know that. Some of the colleagues that I see on the Zoom tonight have experience with our Legislative Action Committee, which I'll talk about a little bit later in the presentation. But is a little preview, I guess. The Legislative Action Committee is LWVCO's Citizen Lobbying Corps, and that group has just got a ton of expertise into the citizen lobbying process and navigating the legislature. So I just kind of wanted to kick things off with an open invitation to them that as we're talking about things, if you all have pearls of wisdom that I may not mention or things that you'd like to share, please feel free to jump in to kind of add to the discussion. In terms of questions, please feel free to, come off mute. You can raise the little hand icon, but honestly, I don't, with my screens displaying the slides, I don't see very well, all of the attendees. So it's probably best if you just go ahead and come off mute and yell out your questions. And then we'll also have time, I think, for some discussion at the end. So let's go ahead and get started. So let's start with, just kind of some introductory information about the structure and the powers of the General Assembly. The Colorado legislature as a body is a bicameral, meaning two-chamber institution with 100 elected members in total. That's comprised of 35 senators who serve 4-year terms and 65 representatives who serve 2 years per term in the House. There are term limits here in Colorado, so members are limited to serving 8 consecutive years in each chamber. This year, we kicked the legislative session off on January 14th. It is a requirement that the General Assembly convene no later than the second Wednesday in January to start their 120-day session. Second Wednesday came a little later in the month this year. So, um, we're usually kind of into it about a week further along, but that's just the way the calendar worked this year. And then, as everyone probably is well aware, the General Assembly is the branch of government that is responsible for making laws for the state of Colorado. When we think about those 100 individuals that make up the Colorado Senate and the House of Representatives, they're coming from Colorado's 100 legislative districts, which are based on population as determined by the US Census. The redistricting or the drawing of those individual 100 districts is the responsibility of the Colorado Independent Redistricting Commissions, which some of you may recall were established in 2018 via the passage of Amendments Y and Z. We're proud to say that LWVCO was heavily involved in the drafting and push for the passage of those amendments. As a result of those 2 amendments that resulted in the constitutional change, there were 2 commissions that were created. One that is focused on drawing the lines for congressional districts, and one that is responsible for drawing the district lines for legislative districts. As of 2026, I believe, maybe it's 2025, but most current numbers, each senator represents approximately 165,000 residents. So the Senate districts, a little bigger, and cover, in most cases, a fair bit of land mass. Representatives are a little more focused in the area that they represent, and the current estimates there are that they represent approximately 88,000 residents. So now I'd like to talk a little bit about the agencies of the General Assembly. Agencies, that's the word that they use to describe what you might think of as kind of the major departments or branches within the General Assembly itself. It may help to think about it sort of like an org chart and, kind of thinking about the different departments that may exist, within an org chart. So the agencies of the General Assembly include the House and Senate, of course, but also a few nonpartisan staff agencies. And these staff agencies consist of the Legislative Council Service, so the staff that comprises the Legislative Council, the Joint Budget Committee staff, the Office of Legislative Legal Services, and the Office of the State Auditor. So, to focus a little bit, just very high level on what each of those agencies do. The Legislative Council staff are the nonpartisan research arm of the General Assembly. So they're providing all kinds of research and information support to, individual legislators, the committees. They're responding to constituent requests for information. I know, LWVCO has reached out many times to get clarification on a whole host of issues, and reaching out to Legislative Council staff is always a heartening experience because they are truly very helpful, very knowledgeable. So really do a great job where constituent services are concerned, and those requests for just different types of information. They also prepare the fiscal notes that accompany the bills. Any bill that has got a fiscal impact and that it's spending money or kind of changing something about the way money either comes in or needs to be allocated out. There will be a fiscal note that provides for that assessment. So not only do we look at legislation and what it's attempting to do in terms of policy or possibly program development. But it's also important to consider the fiscal impact of that too. Essentially, how much is it going to cost and which departments are going to be affected? And is it just a state impact or is there a local government impact? The fiscal notes cover all of that. So they're a really handy source of information, and they're always very important, but they're particularly important in times, like now where we find ourselves in really kind of a budget crunch the General Assembly is facing a budget shortfall. And, there's just a lot of concern about how to sustain funding for existing programs and services, much less anything new. So how much things cost is a, very, very top priority for the General Assembly this year. And then the other really significant thing that the legislative council staff does is to make revenue projections. They will do this on a quarterly basis, and these projections are a key part of the information that gets assessed by the Joint Budget Committee, which we'll talk about in just a second, the governor, the General Assembly as a whole. It kind of informs the overall financial outlook for the state. So as budgeting is done and as legislation is considered that does have a cost attached to it, it gives everyone a sense of the overall economic picture that we're operating within. You can get some really great information from the Legislative Council staff newsletters. The link on this slide, which will be distributed after the presentation at some point soon, you'll see that as a link, so you'll be able to go in and sign up for those if that's something that you're interested in. Not only does it include that fiscal information, but they'll also send out more general policy information and just other updates affecting the General Assembly. So it's a really good source of information. And then if you ever do have questions, looking for information or clarification on a bill or clarification on process, anything along those lines, you can always email them. As I mentioned before, they are extremely responsive and really helpful. So they're a great source to be aware of. Okay, so now turning to the Joint Budget Committee, both I want to talk about both the staff and the committee itself. The Joint Budget Committee staff are one of the key agencies of the General Assembly, and their job, in a very high level sense, is to provide nonpartisan research and analysis. And they will, in doing that, they will make recommendations to the members of the JBC, so they've got good numbers and you know uh, figures that they need to really kind of factor into um, you know the the overall task that they have of providing fiscal oversight and creating the state budget. Which brings me to the Joint Budget Committee itself. The JBC is a really important, powerful committee in Colorado. They do have a broad scope of responsibilities and they meet year round. So, the legislative session, as I mentioned early on, runs for 120 days. And then there's the period when they're not in session that we refer to as the interim. The JBC meets year round and spends a lot of time on that fiscal oversight. They will also hear a lot from the state departments as to their ongoing funding needs and if adjustments need to be made along the way. So it's a really big job for the legislators that sit on this committee. Um, in addition to that fiscal oversight function that they serve over the agencies and the institutions of state government, probably the thing that they are most known for is that they prepare the overall state budget. So all of that information that the staff is feeding in helps them, including those economic forecasts provided by the Legislative Counsel Service. That gives them the information they need to kind of figure out where we're likely headed with the economy, what the state budget is looking like in both a present sense and, kind of looking a bit down the road. That really helps them craft that budget in a way that allows them to balance it, which is a requirement in Colorado. The JBC is a six-member committee, and it consists of the chairperson plus a majority, meaning the majority party, a majority, and one minority, meaning the minority party in the General Assembly, of the House Appropriations Committee. So essentially, three individuals from that committee. And then it also, the other three people are coming from the Senate Appropriations Committee, and those include, similar to the House, chairperson plus one majority, one minority member of that committee. And members serve 2-year terms on the JBC. Okay, one of the other agencies of the legislature is the Office of Legislative Legal Services. And this group of people, this group of attorneys, is the nonpartisan in-house counsel for the General Assembly. And they also have a really broad scope of work focused on, really the legal functions and responsibilities associated with policy development. They're doing things like drafting bills, writing laws, they're producing statutes. They're reviewing the administrative rules that are issued by the state departments. And they're also providing review and comment on proposed citizen initiatives that you see appear on the ballot. Right now, we're in a pretty heavy signature gathering phase for those citizen initiatives. So you probably have encountered people with their clipboards asking for signatures at the grocery store. I see them at the park a lot. You kind of see them all over town. But they are attempting to gather enough signatures to get that initiative to appear on the ballot. But the language and the legal assessment to ensure that the proposed initiative itself, that it meets all of the legal requirements, that assessment is part of the duty of the Legislative Office of Legislative Legal Services. And then again, there is contact information here. You will not be able to get specific information on bills that's not public information unless the sponsor of the bill has authorized you to receive that information from one of the OLLS attorneys. And that's because that's falling under the guise of attorney-client privilege, with the client in this instance being the member of the General Assembly. So as they're working on the development of legislation, it's very often that, community stakeholders, such as members of LWBCO, may be working with a sponsor on legislation, and it can sometimes be necessary to talk to the bill drafter. That is something that does require permission of the sponsor. But for general questions, that sort of thing, general information, of course, you can reach out to them as well through this email address that you see on the slide there. Okay, and then the final agency of the General Assembly is the Office of the State Auditor. And the state auditor, their focus or their purpose is to provide the General Assembly and the public with assessments of the operation of state programs and use of public money, whether that's state funding or federal funding. It's when you hear the word audit, you kind of it means what it sounds like here. It's basically an examination or assessment of, how these programs are working. What does the funding look like? Are there things that can be done better? And in making that assessment, they will identify recommendations that can be made. Oh, I'm hearing, looks like we've got some feedback. I'm not sure what happened there. Um, so as they're examining kind of the inner workings of state government, if they see areas where there could be an increase in efficiency, whether that's fiscal efficiency or improving the effectiveness of programs or services, or doing some things to ensure that the way programs and services are being carried out is staying true to the legislative intent or to the bill that created those programs and services. That's really everything that's falling within the purview of the state auditor. So they also have got a big job here, but the goal is to make sure that our government programs are running efficiently and effectively, and that there is access to those assessments. You can contact them again through the web or the email that's listed here, or you can visit their website if you'd like to see some of the information that they compile to this effect. And that's done really with, kind of the goal of transparency and facilitating public access into kind of the workings of government. All right. Moving along here. We're going to shift a little bit and start talking now about legislation itself and, the actual bills that are moving through the General Assembly. As a starting point, I wanted to say a little bit about, how does legislation originate? Where are these ideas coming from? They come from a lot of different sources. And, as you can imagine, a lot of it is individual legislator priorities. The individuals that run for these seats are often coming into that race with the goal of, representing their community to address specific needs that may have noticed have gone unmet, or they're seeing issues emerge that they think, requires a state legislative solution. They may come with a passion about something that, really causes them to want to kind of focus in on a particular area. Similarly, they might have, professional expertise in an area. That kind of causes them to really want to dig in on a specific topic, or they may take a more broad-based approach. But as you can imagine, legislators are coming to the role with some motivation and ideas for things that they would like to accomplish during their time there. One thing that I really want to emphasize as a source of bill ideas are constituent requests because the process can feel maybe a little overwhelming or intimidated until you get familiar with it. But I really want to emphasize that legislators will tell you themselves over and over that many of the ideas they get for bill requests are coming directly from their constituents. And that's what they want. They want to be able to address the concerns in their community that, people that are going about their daily lives and maybe impacted by something that they think again could use a state legislative fix. Oftentimes the members of the General Assembly may not be aware of that unless a community member comes to them and lets them know about it. So that constituent or citizen outreach and communication is such an important point of getting really kind of to the heart of some of the issues that really could stand to be addressed by a bill. I've included a link here to a Colorado Sun article where you see there, do you have a good idea for a new state law? The article itself is kind of old at this point. You'll see it's from 2019. So, the dates and, some of the information obviously is outdated. But the reason that I wanted to include it is I think that it gives kind of a practical walkthrough of how that constituent contact and, just direct communication with legislators is something that really can be demystified just by reaching out and jumping into the process, and how you can kind of see that take off in a really practical way. So I thought that the article might be helpful for kind of getting a sense of how that works if you aren't otherwise familiar. Some of the other ways that ideas for bills are generated are from advocacy or stakeholder groups. And by that, I mean groups like LWVCO. Obviously, there are many other advocacy and good governance groups in the community. Certainly we are not alone there, and we often work in partnership and coalition with those groups. And it's oftentimes that, during the interim is when a lot of these stakeholder group discussions take place. And we start to hear about issues that are a priority for one group, and we may have kind of a common concern, or, there may be some commonality where we think, yeah, we see that issue too, or would like to see change in that area too. It's really the idea that, combined voices can do more together than any one organization or person can do alone. So, that's really our rationale for working in collaboration with a lot of community stakeholder groups and partner organizations that really come together to figure out, where legislative solutions might be pursued to improve things in Colorado, both for our government or the programs and policies that get operated and implemented by the state, and for the lives of citizens. So that is another key area where bills come from. One of the other things I want to mention is interim committees. The interim committees are small groups of legislators that meet during the interim. So by that, we're talking roughly June to December. Although their work and the action really kicks up kind of in the fall and into the winter leading up to the start of the session. But interim committees are formed to look at a specific issue or a specific topic, and they'll meet. It depends on what their enabling legislation says, but they'll meet according to kind of what was set out there, and what their task has, or what their charge is, through the legislation that created them, to kind of examine things and figure out how they can approach an issue via state legislation to come up with a solution, or to make some sort of improvement. And they'll come out of that season of meetings that they have, recommending specific bills for introduction during the next legislative session. They're able to have up to 5 bills drafted, meaning that the Office of Legislative Legal Services will draft a bill for them so they can fully consider it in its, the language and in its, full form as it might be introduced. And then they can recommend up to 3 of those that they would then present to the Legislative Council Committee, which is another committee within the General Assembly that will then decide whether or not those bills move forward for introduction. So the recommendations of the interim committees are a distinct source of bills, and they're usually the bills that are introduced right at the beginning of the session. And then the last sort of source that I want to talk about as a place where bills can originate are through the executive branch, whether it's a specific state agency or it's a request by the governor. Bills coming out of the executive branch might be needed for a whole host of reasons. Some of it might be to respond to an emerging issue or a problem that has presented itself. Sometimes, existing law needs to be tweaked a bit to either update it or, respond to new circumstances. Sometimes legislation, once implemented, will end up having some unintended consequences that, couldn't be fully anticipated at the time it was passed. So that might be a reason for tweaking. There's a whole host of reasons why some updates might be needed. And then sometimes it's kind of priorities too. We talked about that with individual legislators. We see that with the governor too. We over his term, we've seen a big priority placed on universal pre-K and the legislation that rolled out that program. We've seen a big focus on housing development, particularly affordable housing, to respond to the housing crisis in Colorado, and that concern ends up getting turned into legislation via work between the governor's office and the General Assembly. So all of this is to say that ideas for bills come from a whole lot of places. But I think if you took anything away from this, I want you to remember the constituent request piece, because it really is a prime source of information that legislators use to address problems in their community that they may not otherwise know about unless you told them. So please keep that in mind. Okay, I want to talk now about the process for bills advancing in the General Assembly. If there's a bill that we like, we've managed to get it developed and introduced. You want to follow it closely and continue to advocate for it and explicitly lobby for it, to ensure that it actually gets passed and signed into law eventually. But it's got a long road before it gets to that point. So the development of the legislation and the introduction is one part of the battle. The process of a bill traveling through the legislative chambers is a whole other. But basically, it starts with introduction in the first chamber. Obviously, House bills are going to get introduced in the House. Senate bills are going to get introduced in the Senate. So that's where it's going to start. That's going to be its chamber of origin. And then after introduction, it's going to get a committee assignment. And we'll talk a little bit more about the committees in just a second here, but know that that's kind of its next stop before anything more happens with the full body. Once it's assigned to a committee, it will be at some point scheduled for a committee hearing. And that's a really important thing to track because those committee hearings are a key opportunity for public testimony. That's part of the hearing process. So it's the opportunity for citizens, for interested organizations or stakeholders, any entity or individual that's got an interest in the legislation. This is your opportunity to be heard, to testify, and go on the record, on the public record, and have that preserved as to why you think the bill should pass, or if you're opposed to it, why you think it should not pass. But that's your opportunity to be heard. So during the committee, the committee will take public testimony. They will consider, what they've heard. They'll consider the merits of the bill, and ultimately they will vote whether or not they're going to advance that bill on in the process, or if it's going to stop there. And if they decide to vote it down, basically to kill it off, it's referred to as being postponed indefinitely. Um, Technically, it means that it could be revived and it could come back. Um, that almost never happens. It's just the terminology that, gets used for a bill that essentially has been killed and is not going to proceed in the legislative process for that session. Sometimes you will see bills that have been killed off come back. Well, I should say often you'll see bills come back because sometimes they have to be improved. They go to the process. Sometimes input and testimony exposes flaws and that sort of thing. So they have to be, reconsidered. And, sometimes it takes a session or two or three to get legislation through. So sometimes you will see them come back. But usually when something's been postponed indefinitely, it is not going to proceed that session. Once it's been passed out of committee, though, assuming that that's been the case, it'll move on to what's referred to as second reading in its chamber of origin. So, say if we're in the House, all of the House members are going to come together on second reading to convene in what is referred to as the committee of the whole. And we refer to that as the cow for short. And I mean, it's basically, it's a procedural mechanism that is used to conduct the discussion on second reading. And, it's an opportunity for all members of the chamber to, come together and act as a large committee, essentially, to debate the merits of the bill, talk about amendments that either came up in the committee or might be introduced on second reading. And then ultimately they'll vote on the bill as to, what they think of it, whether it should move on. And then it after that, usually very shortly thereafter, it'll proceed on for a vote on third reading, which is kind of a more formal vote. Votes are recorded in the third reading vote, whereas they're not typically in second reading. And that's really kind of the last stop or the last step, I guess I should say, in the process for the steps it needs to move through in the chamber of origin. So if a bill is passed on third reading, it's considered passed by that chamber and it is then ready to move over to the other chamber. And once that happens, the whole process repeats itself on the other side. And it's got to make it through all of those steps if it is to be passed by both chambers and eventually be sent to the governor for, being signed into law, or in some cases, allowed to time expires and it's allowed to become law without a signature. So that's a very quick explanation of the process, but just know it's got to go through those steps on each side before it has a chance of becoming law. So if you're tracking legislation and actively lobbying on it, you want to make sure that you are closely following it in both chambers, because there are several votes that it has to make through. And there's also opportunity for amendment along the way too. So a bill that you start out liking might get amended in a way that makes you not like it so much in the end, or vice versa. So it's always really important to follow it through each step of the way. Um, so I touched on the legislative committees a little bit, but I wanted to try and dive down a little bit deeper. Um, Similar to the interim committees, I had mentioned they're smaller groups of legislators that are focused on a specific category of bills. The committees that meet during the session are referred to the committees of reference. And what you'll see happen is that bills will get assigned, depending on what topic or issue the bill is dealing with, they'll get assigned to a committee that's got a scope of issues or a focus that, it makes sense. It aligns with what the bill is dealing with. So bills that are dealing with public education are going to go to the Education Committee. Bills that deal with, you know, TANF or, income support programs are going to go to the Health and Human Services Committee. And there's a whole host of committees. I didn't want to list them all out here because they can change a little bit from session to session. Their focus largely remains the same, but there are tweaks from session to session. And this is all available on the General Assembly website under the committees tab, so you can see all of that and get a sense of, what their focus is and essentially what the jurisdiction of that committee is. But as I mentioned, they will be assigned to a committee by leadership in each chamber. And the committee is really there to, as a small group, kind of workshop the bill a little bit. Like I said, they'll consider it on its merits. They'll think about whether or not there's a compelling need for a new state law to address whatever issue is being addressed, whether the bill's crafted in a way that, is appropriately targeted to address the need that is the focus of the bill. The legislators that sit on the committee will hear public testimony and input from the community as to the impacts they think this legislation will have, for better or worse. Consideration will be given to the cost, and then the committee will, potentially consider amendments. Those will get voted on either up or down, and the bill itself will then receive a vote as to whether or not it proceeds or whether it gets postponed indefinitely. In Colorado, there is a constitutional requirement that every bill that's introduced in the General Assembly in a session be given a public hearing via the committee and a vote, and that's referred to as the gavel amendment. Okay, Beth mentioned Schoolhouse Rock. I always think of this visual as a little bit like a Schoolhouse Rock kind of thing. I'm hoping you can see it's kind of tiny on a slide, but I'm hoping that you can see it okay on your individual screen. This chart is also available on the General Assembly website, but it's sort of a handy illustration that sets out kind of the movement from one step in the process to the next that we just discussed. And you can kind of see how it flows through all those steps in one chamber, and then it goes to the second chamber, flows through those steps again. There's a little bit more information here. You'll see conference committee. I didn't mention that before. The conference committee is a committee that's it's a group of legislators from both chambers that are asked to come together to basically resolve amendments that are not aligned or potentially conflict with each other, that were introduced in one chamber or the other. And so the amendments that came out of the House need to be reconciled with the amendments that came out of the Senate. And the committee needs to, basically kind of resolve that so we have a coherent bill. From there, it gets repassed or not. In some instances, no. And then it will go on to the governor for signature, or like I said, it is allowed to become law without signature. In some cases, the vast majority of bills, this is not the case, but in some cases, the governor is inclined to veto something. I think that happened about with 10 bills last year or somewhere in that neighborhood. So it's not, and compared to around the 600 plus that get considered, not that many pass, of course, but there's around 600 bills that get introduced each session. I'd say, I don't know, maybe a little more than half make it through the process. And then last year, I think we saw somewhere in the area of around 10 bills that got vetoed. That veto the General Assembly can let that veto stand, or if they feel really strongly that this bill should not have been vetoed, it should become law, they can attempt to override it, but it is a high threshold. It does require a 2/3 vote of all members. So it's not something that's easily done, but if they feel strongly enough about it, sometimes they will attempt that. And then, once that process is settled, we've got bills that become law. So that's kind of a snapshot of the process. So hopefully that's a handy visual for you all. I also want to talk a little bit about bill tracking. I mentioned a lot about how it's important to stay on top of a bill because there's a lot of things that could happen to it as it moves through the process. So tracking it closely is something that you'll want to do. And then talk a little bit about the citizen lobbying piece and how you can actually be engaged in that process. Probably the most important thing is to remember that relation building is so essential to this process. Getting to know your representative and senator, the people that represent you in the General Assembly are really going to be your go-to for problems that you see emerging in your community that you think are in need of a state solution or a state legislative solution. So, getting to know them. Even if you don't have legislation that you want to propose to them, it's just good to have that relationship because if there's ever a question that you have or a reason that you feel like you need to call them up or you'd like them to pay attention to something, I mean, it could be anything under the sun, essentially. Um, if you have an existing relationship with them, it just makes that process so much easier. So I would really encourage that. Not everyone off the top of their head will know who is representing their community. So fortunately, the General Assembly does provide a way of looking that up for by address. There's a link here. You can type in your address and it'll tell you who your senator and who your representative is. So that is a really handy function. Um, and then another way, short of direct outreach, another way to kind of stay on top of the activities of your representatives is to follow them on social media. They post a lot of information that way. They'll give you information on their social media channels about town halls that they have coming up. Sometimes they have constituent coffees or other sorts of meetings, public appearances that they make. All that tends to get publicized on social media. So that's a really handy tool. You can also look up their websites too. If you just search for them by name, you can generally figure out where their website is. And through there, you can sign up for their newsletters. Also, a really handy way to get periodic updates from them on the bills that they're working on and other issues that have come to their attention. In terms of tracking individual bills, the General Assembly homepage is really kind of the place to go, is sort of your first stop for checking out the daily schedule, but also looking at the committees and their schedules for the day. You can search for specific bills. If you happen to know the bill number, you can type that in the search function. And again, we have links in the slides to let you know kind of where to go for that. But you can search for a bill by number if you have that. You can search by keywords, or you can search by categories of bills. Like if you want to look at all the education bills, you can do that. You can also look at the entire list of bills that have been introduced. That gets to be kind of an unwieldy task the later it gets in the session because it's very lengthy. So it's always helpful to kind of winnow that search down if you can. But a variety of ways to search and keep track of the schedule so you can make sure that you're attending those hearings if you want to testify or if you want to hear the debate on second reading. You can do that by keeping pace with the schedule. Um, We've got a link here on the slide to the legislative committees. So that's an easy way to access their agendas, get information on their meeting times in the meeting room, and the agenda will list out the legislation that they're going to hear for that specific committee hearing. So if there's a hearing coming up on March 13th and we see that our bill is third on the agenda, you're going to want to, either monitor it remotely, and we'll talk about how to do that in just a second, or if you're close enough and it's practical, it's always great to go down to the Capitol and go to the committee room. Committee rooms can be found on the General Assembly site on the committee page. So really easy to follow. The link for live streaming, there's been some really great improvements made to live streaming. Just recently, the committees used to have audio only, but LWVCO was part of a push with many other stakeholders to get that video feed in the committee rooms as well. So it just gives you a better opportunity to monitor things remotely and actually understand who's saying what and just kind of see the proceedings. And you can also monitor the floor proceedings that way too, and you can do that all through the link. If you want to testify, you do need to sign up before you do so, but they make it really easy. You just go to this link that's on the slide where it says sign up to testify, and you'll select your committee based on either the committee or the bill. There's a couple of different ways to search for it. Once you find that, you can indicate whether or not you want to submit written comments, or if you want to testify via Zoom, or if you plan to testify in person. It'll give you options to indicate all of that. Um, and then once you've signed up, you'll get an email confirmation that gives all of the information as to the hearing date and time and that sort of thing. And if you're doing it remotely, you'll get the Zoom link. But again, this information is also on General Assembly homepage. You can access the calendars there. But when it comes time for you to actually testify, it is important to keep in mind that it is a formal process. So there are some procedures and rules to be mindful of, but I don't want to make it sound like it's a scary process because it is intended to be accessible to the public. They want to hear from you. They work for you. So honestly, it takes just a little bit of digging around and familiarizing yourself with the process to pretty quickly demystify it. But one thing I do want to point out is that once you're signed up, the committees will have a list of all the people that are testifying and whether you're for or against the bill, who you're with, if you're with an organization or if you're there as an individual, and they'll call you up. And so if you're there in person, you'll proceed to the testimony table. If you're on Zoom, you'll unmute and you'll provide your testimony. It's really important that you keep everything that you want to say about the bill to 3 minutes. Sometimes they're not strict, like if there's not a lot of public testimony and they've got the time, sometimes they're not too strict about letting people go on a little longer. If it's a crowded day and there's a lot of public testimony, sometimes they are extremely strict and they will cut you off. And sometimes they'll reduce it to 2 minutes per testifier. So it's really important that you craft your comments and your key points in a way that is very to the point and efficient. I'm getting my timer that it is time for me to speed it up so I don't keep you here all night. Okay, so a little bit more on the citizen lobbying process. Just to try and demystify the process a little bit more, really there's just some key things that you need to keep in mind to provide testimony, and it's all really simple. You're basically there just to explain what you want them to do with the bill, whether you want them to advance it, vote yes on it, and move it forward in the process, or if you want them to kill that bill because you think it's a bad idea and you want them to postpone it indefinitely. So you would ask them to vote no on that bill. You want to explain why it's important to you. So you essentially want to make your case for why you're asking for what you're asking. If you can give personal examples on the impact, either the need for the bill, or if you're not in favor of it, if you think that it's going to have negative effects on you or your community, any way you can help demonstrate that. It can be really persuasive. Personal stories are always great. If you can incorporate briefly research or relevant statistics that kind of helps build your point or show specific community impact, that's always really useful. And then again, you want to conclude by asking for specific action, a yes or no on the bill. If there are things about the bill that you think are good, but you'd like to see something tweaked because you think there needs to be a change and you've got a specific reason why you think this change is really important, you can ask for an amendment. It may not be accepted, but it is something that you can discuss with the sponsor. But it is very important that you do that before the committee because the committee is not the time to do that. It's essentially too late because the sponsor will need to consider that. They'll need to have the amendment drafted. There's work that needs to take place leading up to that. So just something to be aware of. If you feel like an amendment is important, you want to make sure that you're giving some lead time. And then, of course, we want to thank the committee for their consideration of your testimony. So if testifying sounds great and you'd like to join a group that does this all the time and be with like-minded people, we would strongly encourage you to join the Legislative Action Committee. The LAC is the LWVCO Citizen Lobbying Corps. It consists of about 40 people this year, and they advocate on LWVCO positions and our organizational priorities. As I mentioned earlier, we often work in coalition and with partner organizations to amplify our voice. It's really easy to participate, even if you don't live in the Denver metro area, because we meet via Zoom from 9 to 11 every other Friday. And if you want to learn more about what we do, you can see examples of our testimony, some articles that some of our members have written, and lists of all of the bills that we're either considering or have formally taken a position on. You can check out the Legislative Action Committee webpage on the LWBCO site. And with that, I think I will conclude and see if there are any questions. I just want to leave you with the slide with our contact information. These are the staff and action and advocacy board chair contact information. Any of these people can answer your questions or get you where you need to be if they can't specifically help you. And if you think the LAC might be for you and you'd like to talk about it a little further, please reach out to one of us and we would be happy to do that. So with that, any questions, discussion, comments? I'll stop sharing so we can see each other again. Jeff, please jump in.
Andrea, hi.
Good
Thanks
to
for the
see you, Jeff.
presentation. Yeah, it's good to know the fundamental structure and appreciate all the work you put into this. We've done a lot of work with the Coalition for Universal Healthcare, and the legislature approved the study from the Colorado Department of Public Health. The project now is sort of put on hold while we're waiting for the study to come from the School of Public Health. But listening to all the steps and stages of bringing a bill to the floor, what could we be doing now above and beyond? Well, one would be creating relationships, correct? But I'm unfamiliar with what the next steps would be once the study is approved and we find that we're going to have great savings. Do we get a sponsor? How does it proceed from there?
It kind of depends on the individual circumstance, Jeff. And in the case of what you're talking about, it's my understanding that the group, once they're armed with the study, that they're looking to pursue a citizens initiative. And so in that case, you'd want to coordinate with the stakeholder groups that have been kind of spearheading the effort to figure out how you can plug into the strategy that's been brainstormed along the way. A lot of it is fundraising, a lot of it is messaging, a lot of it is figuring out how this gets drafted in a way that will get approved. The initiative process is a little bit different. If it's a situation where you're looking for legislation to be introduced, you can always contact legislators directly and start your conversation with them and kind of get their read on it, whether it's your representative directly or if it's somebody, it may be somebody else. It may be, the chair of the Health and Human Services Committee, depending on the topic, and kind of get a read to see what they're considering. You may find out that they're actually considering legislation that might meet some of your needs or could be broadened in a way that might capture that. If you're not lucky enough for that to happen, you can talk to them about the bill idea and kind of get a read and see if it's something you think they would be interested in, or if it's not them, maybe they have colleagues that they could refer you to. As I mentioned earlier, it's always easier to do these things when you've got a lot of community voices, because that really kind of helps move legislators to do what you're asking them to do.
Mhm.
Once you think you've got some potential interest around a bill idea and you kind of see a path forward, meeting with other community stakeholder groups to, run the idea past them, potentially get them on board so they could be part of the collective effort. And then, maybe moving to a bigger meeting with a legislator where you've got more of those community voices joining you. So they come to really understand that, there's a lot of people in my community that want to see this happen. And so it kind of gets them to pay attention. So it's not a super specific answer to what you're
Mhm.
asking, but it does kind of depend on like what the ultimate goal is. And in the case of an initiative, that's a really specific path, where the study is concerned, and putting a question to the voters. But the stakeholder groups there that have been spearheading would be a great place to plug into if you haven't already.
And then within the legislature, do we find an advocate?
If
How do
they
we then
want to
go from
go,
the stakeholders to elevating it to a level where the legislature starts to embrace it and work with it?
if it's a situation where you are trying to get them to do a referred measure, then you would definitely need a sponsor and somebody to champion it within the body. If it's a citizens initiative, obviously having legislative backers and support is great, but because the process works outside of the General Assembly, you don't need a sponsor for that. So again, it kind of works a little differently depending on, what route you're going to take and what the ultimate
Mhm.
goal is.
Is there something we could be doing now? What, because this is going to be a year-long study. I mean, what could we be doing now to build our case so that we're ready when the study comes out?
Um, Again, I think plugging into the stakeholder groups would be the main thing. I
Okay.
know that they do periodic calls to kind of keep everybody informed, and joining those calls so you can be part of the strategizing would be really good. This
Mm,
campaign is also going to take a lot of money, so honestly, a lot of the work that lies ahead is going to be around fundraising.
oh boy. Yeah.
And
Okay. Thanks.
just to jump in, I mean, I attend some of those stakeholder meetings when I can. There's a ton of them. There's several every single week, as far as like right today, there was a meeting on oh gosh, branding, and how to get a cohesive message out to the public as this study is going forward. So anyway, there's all kinds of meetings for that particular um, School of Public Health study and how to
Mhm.
keep it going.
Money, money, money. It
Mhm.
sadly
Yeah,
plays a very large role
Either you raise money or you marry the task force chair of the health task force.
thank you.
because that's your definite path to wealth.
That was a
Hey,
smart move, no matter what, Jeff.
Hmm. Hmm.
man.
Huh.
Mm,
But on that note, it's my job. So
yeah.
I will say thank you for being here. If you found this presentation worthwhile and are able, please consider supporting the League of Women Voters of Colorado.
Mm,
Thank you.
awesome.
Uh, well,
Uh,
there goes
That was
everybody.
that was a good first meeting. Thanks for putting it together.
uh,
Awesome.
thanks, Andrea. That was great.
I'm really
Mhm.
That
was.
was
Oh, you're
that was
welcome.
great.
Lots of material.
Yep. Yep. And Joe, I don't know why you were here. This is the last thing you need. You're an expert.
Joe could have given this presentation
I know.
backward and forward.
And you're on mute, so we can't hear you. You got to unmute, Joe.
Unmute. I thought I might learn something about the uh, capital. What is it? Capital Commons, whatever that new.
Oh,
Oh,
yeah.
But
nope.
That's
no.
so
Sorry.
LAC specific. We didn't want to scare off any people.
Oh well, this be going to my program committee meeting tonight. So
Sweet.
Great.
Okay. Take good care. I didn't know that the JBC works year round.
Mhm.
Are those legislators paid differently?
I don't think so.
Oh boy.
I mean, their per diem probably
Yeah.
looks pretty different,
Sure,
but
but still,
in terms of just pay, I don't think so.
they're paid as part-time people.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, it's a heavy lift.
And
How much
that
do they get paid?
I think
uh
it's around
it's bet
42, right?
How much?
yeah,
45 maybe? It's not very
That's
much.
it?
Mm.
Yeah.
it's under 50,000 even for leadership,
Wow.
which, for a part-time job
I
ain't bad,
suppose.
but
Yeah.
we all know it's not a
Not a
part-time
part-time
job.
job.
Right.
Especially if you're a JBC member, I can't even imagine how many hours they're putting in.
Hmm.
I mean, it's obviously going to fluctuate a little bit depending on where they are, but I mean, it's just a heavy lift at
You,
various points through the year or so.
you
I mean,
know how many hours you work just depends on you as an individual. I asked my primary care doctor when I saw him a couple of weeks ago. I said, "Well, how's it going now for you that you're part-time?" He says,
Hmm.
"Really great. I'm only working 40 hours a week now."
Mhm. Yep. Yeah, instead of 80.
Yep.
Uh-huh. But the problem is we get what we pay for, and
Mm.
we're allowing only a percentage of
Yeah.
folks to run
Right. Because who
just
can do
because
it
they can't
part-time?
afford it.
yeah.
And then how do you organize your life around a 5-month cycle? I mean,
Uh, Who can do that?
would it
It,
take a constitutional amendment to turn it into a full-time job, or is it statutory?
I
well,
And
think
has it
that would
ever
be
been discussed?
constitutional.
Yeah.
I will say that we did submit testimony because there was a legislative pay review commission
Mm.
that was meeting over the interim, and we did submit testimony, basically arguing that for one, this is not a part-time job, and
Mhm.
secondly, this is an equity issue because,
Mhm.
they claim, I mean, on paper, everyone sees the benefit, I think, of diverse people, people with different backgrounds and walks of life. But the reality is, not every person, has the luxury of, you know, leaving their 5-year-old at home while
Right.
they're at a committee
Yeah.
hearing until 1 a.m.
Right.
Or
Yep.
Or if you don't have
leaving their job for half of the
Yeah. Their
year.
other job. Right.
yeah.
I mean, uh, it's and are there still only two legislatures in the state legislatures that are year round?
Oh, that's
Do you know,
all in the
Andrea?
whole country?
I
Oh,
am not
I think
sure
there's
off the top of my
only
head.
two.
Oh,
Yeah.
I
so,
figured
And
we
it's
were the
weird
majority.
ones like Hawaii
Hmm.
uh,
and um
Hmm.
I can't remember who else. I want to say Nebraska, but I think I just like
Wow.
them because they split their electoral votes.
Well, and I believe Nebraska is unicameral too. So
Oh,
they've got
that's
another
weird.
oddity too. Yeah. But yeah, even California, which in my mind, I always think of it like when you think
Like
about legislators, they're not considered like truly full
Crazy.
time, even though I'm
I
sure,
like you gotta be kidding me.
I know.
yeah,
mm,
their day to day probably looks pretty full time to any reasonable
Yeah.
person.
Uh-huh. So you gotta have a rich spouse
mhm.
or I mean it's
Or be
not right.
retired. Be
But
retired.
yeah,
You've got
yeah,
the
but
time and
Mhm.
hopefully you've
Mhm.
got your retirement money that you can live off of in addition to
Yeah.
the small salary that you'll get.
I just Googled it and AI says California, New York, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Massachusetts, Wisconsin, Hawaii, and Alaska.
Wow,
Oh, yeah.
wow.
that's a lot.
Are full time or
Well, actually, I'm going to qualify that. They work, it says 80% of the time. Maybe that's,
Mm.
I don't know about that. Full
huh.
time, top full time states, California, New York, Pennsylvania, and Michigan are considered full time, well paid legislatures.
Mm.
This
Huh.
is
I
some of
wonder
the research that came out during that legislative pay
Mm,
commission study.
okay. Hmm.
I wonder where I got Hawaii. Hmm.
Well,
Well,
it's
no,
in,
I think,
no, it's in there. It's
yeah,
one of the
it
four.
is.
Okay.
Mhm.
Yeah, Alaska, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Wisconsin.
Hawaii's got some logistical challenges too, because like trying to live on your district or live in your district and then travel to the
Mhm.
capital is a big deal there because
Yeah, and it would take a
you,
long time.
yeah, you probably are getting in on a flight,
Well,
Mhm.
and same with Alaska.
right?
And, they're both states with strong indigenous populations.
Mhm.
I wonder how much that influences.
That's a good question.
Mhm.
Huh.
Don't know.
Well, and
So
then
is that
California is
Anyway,
like the 10th or 11th largest economy
fourth,
in the
fourth
in the
world.
world.
in the world?
Yeah. I mean, it's a huge
Yeah,
business.
I
Hmm.
know. It's humongous.
How do you do that? Yeah, you'd have to be full time.
Yeah,
Mhm.
that's where sometimes when you hear like some strategies being proposed about states withholding their federal tax money. California, I have heard, some people have kind of floated that sometimes. It would make a big impact if California actually did that.
Mhm.
Uh-huh. Have you heard about that method of protest, Jeff?
No, what's that?
States honestly withholding their federal taxes.
I love it.
Personally, I do
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Oh my God.
I mean, I was just going to withhold the amount of tax that I would pay to Riverstone Academy to be the first Christian public school, but I mean,
Sure.
we could definitely expand this.
No, I
I mean,
personally
that
love it
is stuff
too.
that's being talked about.
Mhm.
So
Uh,
It
have
talks about
hope.
putting it in a trust fund.
Yeah.
And like if we're not going to get services from the federal government, then you've got a pool of money for the states that
Yeah.
opt
So
into
are
this.
states considering this right now?
Colorado's one of them.
Yeah. And
wow.
I
Okay,
first heard
that's
it floated
exciting.
with California, which when you think
Yeah.
about like what an economic impact that would make. But
Mhm.
they
Yeah.
say Colorado too pays more in federal tax than it receives from
Mhm.
the federal government. So it
Mhm.
would still it'd be a problem if we decided to do it too.
Mhm.
Well, and
Boy,
there's an underground movement kind of to collectivize around this,
That's
states too.
brilliant. That could bring the federal government to its knees if we had
yeah,
enough
but boy, it just seems
numbers.
like a big pissing match. If you don't pay me, I'm not going to pay
Yeah.
this, and
Mhm.
Isn't that
yeah,
what we're doing with
Yeah,
redistricting though?
yeah.
I mean,
absolutely. Hmm.
anyway, what a bunch
I
of
hear you.
nerds are we?
Mhm.
But I love it. I get so excited about all this stuff.
Yeah,
So I want to
exactly.
change the subject briefly. Who's going to write a letter to Governor Polis about Tina Peters?
Yeah,
It's in the news again today.
LWVCO already signed on to a letter this afternoon.
Okay, good.
good.
Do we need an action item again?
It is
Action
being
alert?
considered.
Okay.
This could, you know, Governor Polis is a 2026 leader of democracy.
Right? Yeah. He can't do
And
that.
considering who we honored last year, like, come, dude.
Mhm.
So yeah,
Yeah.
I'm meeting with his staff tomorrow to talk about the
Good.
award.
Okay,
And
great. You will
like,
bring this up, I hope.
I'm going to say that. And
Yeah.
Andrea, like, do you see anything wrong with that? I told Action and Advocacy that I'm like, I'm going to say it.
No, I
Like, that's not
Mhm.
cool.
yeah. No,
And like,
I completely agree with the point that you had made when in email when we were talking about this. This is not analogous to the Sonia Hawkes Lewis situation.
Not
I
at
feel like
not
all.
at
he's
all.
trying to
No.
capitalize on the timing of that because that was
Mhm.
just in the news, and he's trying to say, "Oh, look, it's the same thing." It's not the same thing.
Mhm.
No, it's apples and oranges.
Mm-hmm.
It takes a lot to
So
take a computer and give all the voter information to your
Mm-hmm.
one party. That's a
Yeah.
unique act.
Mm-hmm. That should never be minimized.
That's just a violation of every voter's trust.
Yeah.
in
Right.
Mesa
No,
County.
I mean, she caused millions of dollars
Yes.
in
Yeah.
actual harm.
Yes, she
Mhm.
did. That came out
Taxpayer
of our state
dollars.
coffers. Right.
A lot more out of Mesa County,
Mesa
but
County.
still, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah,
It
not
cost
the
Mesa
same.
County $1.4 million just to litigate and to pay for her salary.
And
Hmm.
that's not even like they
That's
had to
not-
replace all their voting machines.
Right.
That
Mhm. Mhm.
Mhm.
it's maddening. It's
So,
maddening.
so what is Jared Polis looking for then? I mean, I can see his equity and trying to
And
balance
that's what
the,
he's saying.
yeah, but it
He's
doesn't
like,
sound,
well,
it sounds like maybe he's trying to free up federal dollars, to get
Yeah.
Colorado.
But how do you make a bargain like that with someone who
You don't.
changes his mind every 4 seconds?
Yeah, he can't be
Yeah.
trusted.
No.
Yeah.
well,
As
and
a lot of MAGA voters are finding out right now.
yeah.
Hmm.
Well, I think
Ugh.
our governor needs to talk to our attorney general again.
Hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Hmm.
Hmm.
Yep. Who we honored last year
Right.
for
I
prosecuting.
thought they did an excellent job last year.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And they were bipartisan.
Uh-huh.
Absolutely,
That's
Joe.
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Uh-huh.
forget the name of the guy from Mesa County, the AG from
Dan
Mesa.
Rubenstein.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
He's
That was
fantastic.
Mhm.
that was a beautiful pair.
It
They
was.
Uh-huh.
It was
together,
so
they
inspiring.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. The gay governor with the
Yeah.
DA
Conservative.
with his
With the cowboy
frickin'
Western sloper. Yeah.
Yeah.
absolutely.
Just wonder if that's the way life should be.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
Mhm. Hmm.
Well,
All
we're
right.
not the
Okay.
governor, so we gotta
No, but
sometimes
he
go with
does
the
work
flow.
for us. He works for us.
But I
Yeah,
call the governor tomorrow.
yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Give him
Joe.
hell. All right. Time for dinner, everybody. Thank you.
Yeah, no
Thanks,
kidding.
Andrea.
Are you kidding?
Thanks.
I already
Really
had
appreciate
dinner.
Thank you, Andrea.
Oh,
Andrea, enjoy your party.
See you in the
Bye.
morning.
Thanks so
Bye.
much.
bye-bye.
guys.
Bye.